Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Vance. For decades, my world was framed by the familiar views of Chicago, by the steady rhythm of a life well lived, or so it seemed. Alongside my husband, Matthew, I helped nurture a small business idea into Vance Enterprises, a respected name in this city. We built a beautiful home, a family, a reputation. 35 years dedicated to constructing that life, piece by careful piece. It felt secure, established, permanent. Until the moment I stumbled upon a truth so jarring, so fundamentally shattering, that it revealed the entire structure to be a facade. The partner I trusted, the life I cherished, it was all predicated on a lie. A lie so deep and devastating, it felt like the ground simply ceased to exist beneath me. Sharing this is exposing, but perhaps necessary. But first, please like this video and subscribe if you enjoy these stories. It really does help a lot. Thank you. They say the higher you climb, the harder you fall. I used to think that was just something people said, a cliche. Until the moment the ground didn't just disappear beneath my feet, it disintegrated. Pulverized into dust by the one person I thought, the only person I truly believed would always be there to catch me. 35 years. 35 years. Building a life, an empire right here in the heart of Chicago, brick by painstaking brick. Vance Enterprises wasn't just Matthew's dream, it was ours. Forged in late nights, fueled by cheap coffee in a tiny apartment long before the gleaming loop skyscraper pierced the skyline, cemented by shared hopes whispered under the glow of the city lights reflecting off Lake Michigan. We built it all. Or so I thought. The life, the success, the trust. And then, in the space of a single, sickening realization, I saw it for what it had become. A beautifully decorated cage. And I hadn't even noticed the bars. Where do I even begin? Our life. It looked perfect, didn't it? From the outside, I imagine it was enviable. The brownstone here in Lincoln Park, meticulously restored, filled with art collected over decades. The galas at the Art Institute, the box seats at the Symphony, the obligatory appearances on the charity circuit. Matthew always insisted we maintain the right image. Vance Enterprises thrived, a testament to Chicago grit and, I believed, our partnership. Matthew was the face, the dynamic CEO steering the ship, charming investors and city officials. And I had transitioned years ago. From crunching numbers alongside him in the early days to managing the home, raising our children, who are thankfully grown and forging their own paths now, and handling the social obligations that came with his position. I chaired committees, hosted dinners, smoothed ruffled feathers, the supportive corporate wife. It was a role I accepted, perhaps even embraced for a time. There was comfort in it, a rhythm. The changing seasons mirrored our lives. Crisp autumn walks along the lakefront, glittering winter fundraisers downtown, hopeful springs watching the city bloom from our windows, bustling summers filled with neighborhood festivals and rooftop gatherings. Predictable, stable, safe, that safety. It was an illusion, wasn't it? A carefully constructed facade Matthew maintained while apparently living a completely different life behind my back. The signs, looking back now with the brutal clarity of hindsight, they were probably there. Subtle shifts. An increasing distance masked by grand gestures. More late nights attributed to board dinners in River North or client meetings that stretched impossibly late in the loop. A certain impatience when I asked about company matters, a dismissiveness I'd chalked up to the stress of his position. How could I have been so blind? Was it willful ignorance? Did I subconsciously choose not to see because unraveling that thread would mean unraveling everything? The comfort had become complacency, the trust, a vulnerability he exploited. He'd always been ambitious, driven. That Chicago hustle was part of what drew me to him back at Northwestern. But somewhere along the line, ambition curdled into arrogance. Success inflated his ego until there wasn't room for anything, or anyone, else. Especially not for the woman who remembered when Vance Enterprises was just a hopeful entry in a ledger book. He started treating me less like a partner, even a silent one, and more like part of the elegant decor, necessary for appearances but easily overlooked. The emotional distance grew into a canyon, but I kept telling myself it was just a phase. The pressure of running a multi-million-dollar company. We still attended events arm in arm, smiled for the cameras, played our parts. But the shared glances, the inside jokes, the easy intimacy that had evaporated so gradually, I barely marked its passing, until the chill became undeniable. It started, innocuously enough, with the company credit card statements. I still handled the household accounts, a holdover from leaner times. Matthew usually just signed off on them without a glance. But a charge caught my eye. A ridiculously expensive piece of jewelry from a boutique on Oak Street. Not my style. Not an anniversary. Not my birthday. When I casually asked him about it, thinking perhaps it was a corporate gift for a major client, he waved it away. Client appreciation, Nicole. Necessary goodwill. But his eyes didn't quite meet mine. It was a flicker, a tiny crack in the polished veneer. A discrepancy. Small. Easily explained away. Yet, it planted a seed of unease. A tiny cold knot in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't dissolve. It felt wrong. Dishonest. And that little knot, that tiny seed of doubt, it was just the beginning. It was the loose thread that, once pulled, would unravel everything I thought I knew. The life I had meticulously helped weave was about to come apart, spectacularly, right before my eyes. And the silence in our beautiful Lincoln Park home suddenly felt deafening, heavy with secrets I was terrified to uncover. That tiny seed of unease, it was relentless. Like a persistent Chicago winter wind finding its way through the smallest crack in the window pane, it chilled me to the bone. I tried, initially, to push it away. Matthew was stressed, I told myself. Running a company like Vance Enterprises, navigating the complexities of the Chicago market, the constant pressure, it takes a toll. Of course, he'd be distracted. Maybe a little careless with explanations. And the jewelry? A momentary lapse in judgment, perhaps? A misguided attempt at corporate schmoozing. Plausible deniability. Oh, the lies we tell ourselves to keep the picture frame intact, even when we sense the image inside is warping. But the explanation felt thin, flimsy. Like tracing paper held up to the light, revealing the darker shape beneath. That cold knot in my stomach remained, tightening whenever Matthew breezed in late, smelling faintly of expensive cologne I didn't recognize, offering vague excuses about networking events or last-minute strategy sessions downtown. The easy camaraderie we once shared felt utterly fractured, replaced by a brittle performance on both our parts. He played the magnanimous CEO, I played the gracious wife. But the stage felt increasingly hollow. The silence between us, once comfortable, now pulsed with unspoken questions. And so I started to look. Not out of malice, not initially. It felt more like self-preservation. A need to understand the source of that chilling draft that had permeated the warmth of our home. I began reviewing past credit card statements going back months, not just the household accounts I usually managed, but the corporate accounts Matthew had assured me were handled solely by his impeccably efficient finance department in the Loop office. Accessing them wasn't difficult. I still had legacy credentials. From the early days, privileges Matthew likely assumed I'd long forgotten or wouldn't bother to use. He underestimated me. He always did. That was perhaps his most critical mistake. It started as a trickle, then became a flood. More charges at high-end boutiques, not just on Oak Street, but across the Gold Coast. Reservations at intimate, incredibly expensive restaurants known more for discretion than for corporate entertaining. Places I knew Matthew wouldn't take stodgy board members. Then came the hotel charges. Not sprawling suites at the Palmer House for visiting dignitaries, but recurring bookings at chic, boutique hotels, the Langham, the Peninsula, always midweek, always coded vaguely as client lodging or conference expenses. My blood ran cold. Who was this client requiring such lavish, repeated accommodation? The knot in my stomach tightened into a fist of ice. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't stress. This was a pattern, a deliberate, calculated deception funded by the company we built. The company whose foundation I helped lay while Matthew was still dreaming of making his mark. And then, I found the payments. Regular substantial wire transfers coded under external consulting fees. The recipient? A private LLC, an LLC, easily traceable with a single registered agent, Chloe Sterling. Chloe Sterling. The name hit me like a physical blow. Not just anyone. Her. The bright, ambitious young anchor from Channel 7 News. The one Matthew had insisted on hiring for that splashy Vance Enterprises PR campaign last year, raving about her fresh perspective and understanding of the Chicago market. I remembered the launch party at that trendy gallery in River West. Matthew, practically glowing, introducing her around. Chloe, sharp and polished, laughing a little too readily at his jokes. I'd felt a flicker of something. Even then. A professional jealousy, I'd told myself. Or perhaps just the slight awkwardness of seeing my husband so clearly captivated by someone else's energy. Now, seeing her name attached to those clandestine payments, that flicker ignited into a sickening certainty. The cliché of it all was almost insulting. The older, powerful executive trading in his wife for a younger, glossier model. And using company funds to do it. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a deep, violating trespass against our shared history, against the very enterprise that bore our name. The hurt was immense, a physical ache in my chest. Tears threatened, hot, and stinging. But beneath the grief, something else began to stir. A cold, hard fury. The kind that doesn't scream, but calculates. The kind that narrows your focus and steels your spine. He hadn't just broken my heart. He'd insulted my intelligence. He'd gambled with our legacy, my legacy, assuming I was too complacent, too comfortable in my Lincoln Park life to notice or care. He thought I was merely the supportive wife, the decorative hostess. He forgot I was the woman who helped balance the books when we barely had 2 nickels to rub together. He forgot I understood the intricate financial pathways of Vance Enterprises better than almost anyone, because I'd helped map them out. In that moment, staring at the damning evidence spread across my antique desk, the credit card statements, the wire transfer confirmations, Chloe Sterling's smiling face flashing in my mind's eye, the grief began to recede, replaced by a chilling clarity. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. This was about theft, betrayal on a corporate scale. And Matthew wasn't just going to get away with breaking my heart. He was going to answer for what he'd done to the company we built together. The tears dried up. The trembling stopped. My mind, sharpened by decades of navigating Chicago's complex social and business landscapes, began to work. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed undeniable proof. Proof that would stand up not just in divorce court, but potentially in a boardroom. The game had changed. And Matthew had no idea he was even playing against me. Not yet. My resolve, once it hardened, became a shield. The raw, ragged edges of grief were still there, beneath the surface, but they no longer paralyzed me. Instead, they fueled a cold, clear focus I hadn't felt in years. Matthew thought he'd relegated me to the sidelines of our life, a passive spectator in the comfortable seats of our Lincoln Park home. He had forgotten that I knew how the game was played because I'd helped write the early rulebook for Vance Enterprises. He saw the elegant hostess, the dutiful wife. He failed to see the woman who had once spent countless nights poring over spreadsheets, who understood the flow of capital, the nuances of corporate structure, the very sinews that held our company together. His arrogance, his complete underestimation of me, would be his downfall. I simply had to provide the stage, the spotlight, and the script. And so my quiet, meticulous work began. Nights became my sanctuary. After Matthew fell asleep, often after returning late from yet another fictitious client dinner, I would retreat to my study, the one room in the house that still felt truly mine. Surrounded by books, by the quiet hum of the city settling, outside my window I delved into the digital heart of the company. Matthew, ever forward-looking in his public pronouncements, was surprisingly lax about legacy systems. He assumed the old servers, the archived databases, were obsolete, irrelevant. He hadn't counted on me retaining knowledge of their structure, the old passwords tucked away in the recesses of my memory. It was like archaeology, digging through layers of digital sediment. Financial reports from years past, internal audit trails he thought were buried, project expense logs he'd approved with barely a glance. With my newfound cynical clarity, patterns emerged that I'd previously missed or dismissed. Anomalies. Inflated invoices from certain vendors. Travel budgets that ballooned inexplicably around specific dates. Dates that often coincided with Chloe Sterling's social media posts from suspiciously sunny locales. Each discovery was a small, cold confirmation. Each discrepancy, another brick in the wall of evidence I was carefully constructing. It required a level of compartmentalization I hadn't known I possessed. During the day, I maintained the facade. I discussed catering for an upcoming charity luncheon, arranged for repairs on the brownstone's finicky heating system, even endured tense, sterile dinners with Matthew where the conversation skirted the vast, silent chasm between us. He seemed oblivious, wrapped up in his own self-importance and the thrill of his secret life. He'd occasionally ask if I was feeling all right, noting I seemed quiet. Just a bit tired, I'd murmur, amazed at the steadiness of my own voice, the ease with which the lie slipped out. Inside, a storm raged. Sleep offered little respite, often filled with fragmented dreams of falling, of discovering hidden rooms, filled with mocking laughter. Yet each morning I'd rise, dress, put on the mask of Nicole Vance, the composed wife, while the strategist inside me reviewed the previous night's findings and planned the next step. I knew I needed more than just financial irregularities. I needed something undeniable, something that spoke directly to a flagrant abuse of power and resources. My Chicago network, cultivated over decades of civic engagement and quiet observation, became a subtle tool. A carefully worded question over lunch with an old friend now on the board of another major Chicago corporation. We're reviewing our own corporate governance policies at Vance, particularly around executive expenses and asset usage. What's considered best practice these days regarding personal use of company resources like jets? Innocent enough. No accusations, just seeking wisdom. But the answers, the knowing glances, helped sharpen my focus. The company jet. Matthew loved that jet. A sleek Gulfstream, parked out at Midway, always ready to whisk him off to meetings, or so the logs claimed. Gaining access to the detailed flight, manifests and catering orders required finesse. I couldn't go through official channels. But I remembered the name of the dispatcher at the private aviation company Vance used, a helpful woman I'd chatted with years ago when arranging a family trip. A polite phone call, ostensibly to inquire about charter rates for a potential personal trip. Matthew is so busy, I thought I might treat myself. A few carefully placed questions about typical flight patterns and record keeping. It was enough. Enough to cross-reference with Matthew's official calendar and the company expense reports. The discrepancies were glaring. Multiple weekend trips logged as site visits or investor meetings in cities with no Vance operations, coinciding perfectly with dates Chloe Sterling was also demonstrably out of town. Receipts for couples' spa treatments buried within catering invoices, flights to Naples, Florida, logged as trips to Des Moines. It wasn't just misuse, it was blatant documented fraud. This was the smoking gun. Not just infidelity paid for with company cash, but a systematic pattern of lying, of theft, documented in the cold, hard data of flight coordinates and timesheets. I spent hours compiling it all. Spreadsheets linking dates, expenses, locations, flight manifests, Matthew's official calendar, and where possible, Chloe's public appearances or social media check-ins. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, a meticulous ledger of his lies. Holding the completed dossier, printed and bound, felt heavy. It was the weight of 35 years of shared history twisted into evidence for his destruction. The weight of my own disillusionment. But also, the weight of power. The power to expose him, to reclaim my own narrative. And I knew, with absolute certainty, where the final act had to take place. The Vance Foundation Gala, the glittering jewel in Matthew's philanthropic crown, held annually in a landmark Chicago venue, attended by the city's elite, board members, clients, politicians, media. His stage, where he preened and postured about integrity and community. It was perfect. The irony was almost delicious. The meticulous planning wasn't just about gathering facts anymore. It was about stage management, setting the scene for Matthew's final public performance. The evidence was secure, the target venue selected. Now, all that remained was to wait for the right moment, the perfect cue. The curtain was about to rise on his downfall. The night of the Vance Foundation Gala arrived wrapped in the kind of crisp, glittering cold that only a Chicago autumn can truly perfect. Stars seemed brittle in the dark sky, mirroring the tension coiling tight within me. Our chosen venue, the vast, soaring hall of the Field Museum, buzzed with the self-important energy of the city's elite. Diamonds glittered, champagne flowed, and the low roar of conversation echoed off the towering dinosaur skeletons, silent, ancient witnesses to the very modern drama about to unfold. I moved through the crowd feeling strangely detached, as if watching myself in a play. I wore a gown the color of midnight, elegant and understated, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside. My smile felt painted on, my polite greetings automated. Matthew, of course, was in his element. Holding court near the entrance, shaking hands, beaming, accepting accolades for the foundation's supposed generosity. Generosity funded in part by the very accounts he'd been pilfering. He looked every inch the triumphant CEO, the city benefactor, utterly oblivious. Beside him, for strategic parts of the evening, stood Chloe Sterling, radiant in something red and eye-catching, playing her role as the dynamic media personality graciously supporting Vance Enterprises. Seeing them together, the easy familiarity in their glances, the proprietary way his hand occasionally brushed her back, it sent a fresh wave of cold fury washing over me, solidifying my resolve. This wasn't just about corporate malfeasance. It was about the flagrant disrespect, the public flaunting of his betrayal under the guise of business and philanthropy. My plan was simple, reliant on precision timing and technology. Weeks earlier, using my knowledge of the event's AV setup, information readily available through my past involvement with gala planning committees, I'd arranged for a trusted, external tech consultant, someone discreet, fiercely loyal from a past project, and completely unconnected to Vance Enterprises, to have remote access to the main presentation system. He owed me a significant favor. The dossier I'd compiled, documenting Matthew's affair and his systematic embezzlement, complete with scanned receipts, incriminating emails, wire transfer records, and the damning flight logs of the company. Jet was loaded onto a secure encrypted file. Ready, waiting for my signal. I'd also prepared packets, concise summaries of the key findings, for each board member, including Marcus Thorne. Marcus and I had spoken briefly a few days prior, not about Matthew directly, but about the fiduciary duty of board members, about the importance of protecting a company's reputation. His thoughtful, troubled expression told me he suspected something was amiss. I felt confident he, at least, would act responsibly when presented with facts. The signal would be subtle. During Matthew's main address, his annual self-congratulatory speech from the podium, I would send a simple coded text message: activate. I circulated, exchanging pleasantries, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw Marcus across the room, nodded slightly. He nodded back, his gaze steady, waiting. Then came the moment. Matthew strode to the podium, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights, soaking in the applause. He launched into his speech, filled with platitudes about integrity, community, and the bright future of Vance Enterprises. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My hand tightened around the small clutch bag containing my phone. As he paused for effect, preparing to announce a major and likely unearned donation, I took a deep breath, averted my eyes from the stage, and typed the single word: activate. I hit send. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, behind Matthew, the massive screen that was supposed to be displaying the Vance Foundation logo flickered. Matthew frowned, momentarily distracted. The screen went black, then lit up again. Not with the logo, but with the first page of my dossier. A clear, damning email exchange between Matthew and Chloe, discussing a getaway on dates coinciding with a supposed business trip, with flight confirmations from the company jet visible. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Matthew stared at the screen, his face slack with disbelief, then whitening with fury as he realized what was happening. He spun around, shouting for the AV team, but it was too late. The screen began to cycle through the evidence. The Oak Street jewelry receipt. The exorbitant hotel bills from the peninsula. The wire transfers to Chloe's LLC, labeled consulting fees. The flight logs, Naples, not Des Moines, Aspen, not Cleveland, juxtaposed with Matthew's official falsified calendar entries. Each slide was a hammer blow, dismantling his reputation piece by painstaking piece before the very audience he sought to impress. The hall descended into chaos. The initial stunned silence erupted into a cacophony of whispers, frantic phone calls, reporters scrambling. I saw Chloe Sterling's face drain of color, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal before she turned and practically fled through a side exit, disappearing into the night. Matthew stood frozen at the podium, sputtering denials that were drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. His face, usually so controlled, was contorted with rage and panic. He looked utterly lost, stripped bare under the harsh glare of the spotlight he had so desperately craved. Then I saw Marcus Thorne rise purposefully from his seat near the front, followed by two other senior board members. They walked towards the stage, their faces grim. They didn't look at the audience. Their focus was entirely on Matthew. They reached the podium, spoke quietly but firmly to him, and then, one on each side, effectively escorted him off the stage, away from the glare towards a side room. The king had been dethroned in his own court. I remained standing amidst the swirling currents of the crowd, watching the spectacle unfold. I felt strangely calm. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of emptiness, but also undeniably vindication. The truth was out. The meticulously crafted facade Matthew had hidden behind for years had shattered into a million pieces. The damage was done, irreparable and public. Justice served cold and bright under the museum lights. The gala was over. The real fallout was just beginning. The explosion at the gala sent shockwaves reverberating through the city, far beyond the stunned confines of the Field Museum that night. The immediate aftermath was a blur of flashing cameras outside, hushed, frantic phone calls, and the swift, almost surgical removal of Matthew from the scene by the grim-faced board members. I remember walking out into the cold Chicago air, the sudden quiet after the cacophony feeling surreal. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. Just emptied. Like I'd finally lanced a terrible wound, drained the poison, but was left acutely aware of the void it left behind. The fallout, however, was brutally efficient. Marcus Thorne and the board moved faster than I could have anticipated. Matthew was suspended by morning, his access to the Loop headquarters revoked. An emergency shareholder meeting was called. Internal and external auditors descended upon Vance Enterprises, confirming every piece of evidence I had presented, and uncovering even more layers to Matthew's financial deceptions. His termination was swift, unanimous, and mercilessly public, announced via a terse press release picked up instantly by Cranes and the Tribune. The scandal rocked the Chicago business community, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones at the university club and over power lunches. Matthew, stripped of his title, his reputation in tatters, became persona non grata overnight. As for Chloe Sterling, her calculated escape from the gala was only a temporary reprieve. The association with the scandal proved toxic. Her network quietly distanced her, and her bright media career dimmed considerably, a footnote in Matthew's spectacular implosion. My divorce proceedings were, by contrast, remarkably straightforward. Armed with the irrefutable proof of both infidelity and significant financial misconduct, marital assets diverted, company funds embezzled, Matthew had no leverage, no room to negotiate. He seemed broken, diminished, a shadow of the arrogant tycoon who had dismissed me so readily. He signed the papers quickly, eager, I suspect, to simply make it all go away. The settlement was more than fair. It was substantial, securing my financial independence completely, freeing me from any reliance on the Vance name or fortune ever again. The board, under Marcus's steady leadership, offered me a role, a seat at the table, acknowledging my history with the company and perhaps the debt they owed me for exposing the rot within. I considered it. A part of me, the part that still felt fiercely protective of the enterprise I helped build from scratch, was tempted. I did agree to consult during the initial stabilization period, ensuring a smooth transition, protecting the jobs of loyal employees who deserved better than Matthew's recklessness. But ultimately, I declined a permanent position. Vance Enterprises was part of a past I needed to close the door on. My future lay elsewhere. Rebuilding wasn't easy. There were days clouded by sadness, by the phantom limb ache of a 35-year partnership, however flawed. There were moments of bitterness, wondering how things might have been different. Revenge, I discovered, is a complex dish. Even served cold, it leaves a lingering metallic taste. It provided justice, yes, a necessary rebalancing of the scales, but it didn't magically erase the scars or the years of carefully constructed lies. Healing is quieter work. It involved reclaiming parts of myself I'd set aside for decades. Rediscovering my own interests, reconnecting with old friends Matthew had subtly discouraged, traveling not for company obligations but for my own curiosity, seeing the Tuscan hills, exploring the galleries of Paris, simply sitting in a quiet cafe watching the world go by, answerable only to myself. I sold the Lincoln Park brownstone, that beautiful cage filled with too many ghosts. I moved into a sleek modern condo overlooking Millennium Park. The view is different from here. Looking out at the familiar Chicago skyline, the bean gleaming, below the lake stretching out vast and blue, it no longer feels like the backdrop to Matthew's empire. It feels like my city again. A city of resilience, of second chances. My life now is smaller, perhaps, than the grand stage Matthew preferred, but it's infinitely more authentic. It's mine. I volunteer at a literacy center downtown. I've taken up photography again, capturing the city's hidden corners, its raw beauty. I manage my own investments, finding a quiet satisfaction in the competence Matthew never acknowledged. There's a peace in the simplicity, a strength in the solitude that isn't loneliness. It's independence. The path I took was drastic, born of deep pain and righteous anger. It was the right path for me, in that specific impossible situation. But the choices we make under duress, the lengths we go to when pushed to the absolute limit, they shape us in ways we can never fully predict. Looking back, the journey was brutal, but the destination, finding myself again, standing on my own 2 feet, free. It was worth the fight. But I often wonder about the crossroads, that moment of discovery, the weight of the betrayal. There are so many ways the story could have gone. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have sought that kind of revenge, the public takedown, or would you have perhaps chosen a quieter path, simply walked away to rebuild? There's no single right answer, is there? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd genuinely be interested to hear different perspectives. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about navigating life's unexpected turns and finding strength in unexpected places, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out. Thank you for listening, truly.